and Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who I will talk about in a few moments. But they face legal, social, economic, and educational discrimination and other forms of discrimination, cultural and symbolic. For example, the flag of the state that they live in bears a religious symbol that is not their religious symbol. Very similar to having a crucifix as the flag of the United States. You have a Star of David on the flag, and Hanin Zobi was talking about how as children on Israel's Independence Day, Palestinian children in the schools were forced to wave Israeli flags, a flag of a state which sees them as disloyal, as not belonging, and where they face increasing discrimination. There are 24 separate laws in Israel that discriminate legally against Palestinian citizens. One of them is the citizenship law, which in 2004 was amended to include a provision that prohibits Israeli citizens from marrying Palestinians in the West Bank, from the West Bank and Gaza Strip, or from surrounding countries, and living with them in Israel. Palestinians, of course, have very close kinship ties across these armistice lines and these artificial partition lines. And so there's a lot of marriage across these lines. And you would have Palestinians from the West Bank marrying Palestinians in Israel. And as you would expect, the universally recognized right to family life, they would go and live with their spouse. Since 2004, that is illegal. If you are a Palestinian citizen of Israel, you cannot do that. If you want to marry a Palestinian from elsewhere, you can marry someone from Finland and have them come and live in Israel with you. You can marry someone from Korea or from South Africa and have them come and live with you. But you can't marry someone from the West Bank or Gaza and have them come and live with you. That's illegal. And so you have to leave the country if you want to live with your spouse. This is the amendment to the citizenship law from 2004. And it's one which human rights activists in Israel liken to the anti-miscegenation laws that existed in the United States until the civil rights movement ended them. But of course, the real reason that Israel has them is because it perceives its Palestinians as a so-called demographic threat. This is a term that is used routinely in Israel, that Palestinians are a demographic threat. Why is that? Because prior to the establishment of Israel, Palestinians were the numerical majority, overwhelmingly, within historic Palestine, what is today Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. After the expulsion and flight in 1948 to 1950, 90% of the Palestinians living in the area that became Israel were forced to leave and not allowed to return, or were outside the country for they might have been studying or on vacation, not allowed to return home. 90% were expelled to the West Bank, to Gaza, to Jordan, to Syria, to Lebanon, and points beyond. The law of return, so-called law of return, allows any person that Israel designates as a Jew. Of course, who is a Jew has always been a very contentious issue in Israel, and who controls the definition of who is a Jew. But anyone that Israel recognizes as a Jew is free to go and live there, even to live, especially to live on land confiscated from Palestinians, whereas Palestinians born in the country are forbidden from returning. People like my mother, there may be other Palestinians in the room. My mother was born in Jerusalem. She's not entitled to go and live in there or to reclaim her family's property, not just real estate, but furniture, artwork, books, all the things which were taken from Palestinians. More than 60,000 books were looted at the time as well, and many of them are now in the Library of the Hebrew university. So all of these things are now forbidden to Palestinians to return to. So this idea of a demographic threat is one which is, I think, worth thinking about, because what does it mean to define any group of humans as a demographic threat merely because they exist and they're born? I think that's something worth thinking about, that it goes to the core of our humanity if we say that a group of people is a demographic threat because they are Hispanic, because they're African American, because they're Jewish, because they're Palestinian. That's the normal language within Israel. And so when the marriage law was passed in 2004, Ariel Sharon, who was prime minister at the time, said very explicitly, let's not hide behind excuses of security. He was very explicit that this was a method of demographic manipulation and control. We can say more about the situation within Israel in the Q&A, but I want to move on. Talk about the situation in the West Bank. And you're very familiar, I'm sure many of you, when Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967, it began to settle Israeli Jews in the West Bank with the explicit goal, they made no bones about it, of making sure there could never be an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank. The idea was to annex it. This is illegal under international law, so the Israeli strategy was facts on the ground. And here we are today in 2010, and you have 500,000 Israeli Jews living in the occupied West Bank. And what you have is continued active settler colonialism, particularly in and around occupied Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a small city historically, but Israel has redefined the municipal area of Jerusalem to include a huge swath of the West Bank, and even has plans to extend so-called Jerusalem down further into the West Bank. And we see very active settler colonialism house by house in areas in and around Jerusalem, in Palestinian neighborhoods like Silwan, Isawiyah, At-Tur, and others. Just recently, we've seen quite an upsurge in settlers taking over houses, taking over properties. There's been a particular upsurge in house demolitions in recent months. In August, Human Rights Watch did a report on the sharp rise in the number of demolitions of Palestinian homes in the occupied West Bank. In July 2010, Israel destroyed 141 homes and other buildings. Just yesterday, in Jerusalem, they destroyed a business that employed 20 Palestinians. It was a car wash business that is owned by a Palestinian. And the excuse is always the same. It's an illegal building. Well, of course it's an illegal building, because under Israeli law, because Israel doesn't give permits to Palestinians to build on their own land. Now, you have to consider, go back to Israel for a minute. In 1948, there were only about 120,000 Palestinians left in what became Israel. Through natural growth, they're now 1.2 million. 10 times. They've grown 10 times in number. Just within Israel. In that time, how many new towns or villages has Israel allowed Palestinian citizens of the state to build? Does anyone know? Zero. Precisely zero. There have been zero new towns or developments for Palestinians in Israel since 1948. And in addition to that, you've had massive confiscation of Palestinian-owned land within Israel. Well, the situation is very much the same in Jerusalem and the West Bank. where you see the vast expansion of the